is, I think we were in hymn 6. At least that's where my mark was. Proper exercise. Is that right?
Mine's mark is
Or 5.
Yeah.
Okay, because I had a mark and I took it out earlier and I thought I got it back right.
I may have finished one. I haven't underlined anything in 5, so let's see if we can talk about it.
Let's see.
Oh yeah, we got. Yeah, we haven't done 5 yet.
In 5, which I want to go through kind of quickly. I'm actually going to go through 6, I think, a little quickly too. I want to get up to a couple of later ones. And 1 or 2 hymns we might skip entirely. 5 is where he deals with that issue that Brock discussed in the introduction of how is paradise large enough for all the saved? And so he uses the analogy of, well, a single heart contains, stanza 10, contains infinite thoughts. So if a single heart can contain infinite thoughts, then it ought to be pretty easy for God to be able to figure out how paradise can contain a large number of souls. Okay? In fact, he says there at the top of page 106, how much more will paradise, the glorious, suffice for the spiritual beings that are so refined in substance that even thoughts cannot touch them. Now, notice that it's kind of interesting talking about spiritual beings and substance. Okay, because we kind of think of, well, if it's spirit, then it's not matter. But it is matter. It's just matter deified, if you want. I'm not talking about the doctrine of theosis here. It's, the difference between Christ's body before his death and resurrection and Christ's body after his death and resurrection. Before his death and resurrection, we never see him, so to speak, come into a locked room without coming through the door. Afterwards, we do see that happen. Okay? And then he goes on towards the end of this hymn on page 107. And he introduces an idea, and I take that back. I don't know if it's introduced now or if it actually showed up earlier. I don't remember if it showed up earlier. But it's an idea that we're going to see later, almost an entire hymn written about. And it's in stanza 13. And he says towards the end of 13, well, let me just do the whole stanza. I was in wonder as I crossed the borders of paradise at how well-being, as though a companion turned round and remained behind. And when I reached the shore of earth, the mother of thorns. Notice, the shore of earth. The shore, because it's separated by water between earth and paradise. But he calls the shore of earth the mother of thorns. That is, earth is the mother of thorns, the mother of pain, the mother of sorrow. I encountered all kinds of pain and suffering. I learned how, compared to paradise, okay? I learned how, compared to paradise, our abode is but a dungeon. Life on earth, he says, is a dungeon compared to paradise. Yet the prisoners within it weep when they leave it. What does he mean there?
Afraid of death.
They're afraid of death. Okay? But if life on this earth is a dungeon, okay, why should they be afraid to leave? I mean, it's an issue that Plato brings up in the dialogues of Socrates, okay, in the Phaedo, where after Socrates' conviction by the Senate, and he's getting ready to die, and getting ready to drink the hemlock, Plato and the others come to him and say, we've bribed off a guard, we can get you out of Athens, you can go anywhere you want. And Socrates says two really interesting things there. One is, Well, to leave Athens is to leave life. There's nothing outside of Athens. And part of that is because of the importance of the Greek city-state to the Greek mind. Okay, that one's identity was tied to one's city. But the other thing he says essentially is, have you learned nothing of all that I've been teaching you all these years? Because he says, what should one fear? Let's apply a little logic. What should one fear? What one knows. The unknown should not be feared. How many of you fear what is out in that hallway right now? Probably nobody.
I didn't until right.
Do you know what's out in that hallway right this moment? No. Do you know what's out there in the, loop, circle drive, whatever you call that thing right now? No, none of us do. For all we know, there could be some crazy getting ready to come up and blow up Peck Hall. It's a possibility. It could happen. Okay? But it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened in our previous experience. So we tend to think, well, because it hasn't happened in our previous experience, therefore it won't happen tomorrow. Tell that to the Russians who woke up to the meteor last week. Okay? Hadn't happened to them before. Suddenly it does. So we don't tend to worry about or fear the unknown except for one instance. Death. Why? Because it's the great unknown.
No one's coming back to tell us what happened.
As Shakespeare says in Hamlet, it is the undiscovered country from whose bourne no one returns. Okay? No one's come back with snapshots, of the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, the warm, fuzzy feeling. We've not had recordings of that. We hear people who've had life after death experiences and they say things, but for most people it's like, that's nice, but maybe that was your body kicking in all kinds of endorphins. Maybe that was X, Y, or Z. Okay? Because I don't know if any of you, but I've never met a quote-unquote Lazarus. Because, that would be the real life after death experience. Because how long was he dead? 4 days. Most life after death experiences that you read about are, where somebody comes back 10 minutes later. 30 minutes later sometimes, okay? But not 4 days. 4 days, rigor mortis is set in. The body starts to rot and stink. Okay? But the prisoners within it weep. Because we don't think of this as the prison. We think of this as being everything there is. Or we think of this as not being everything there is, but we're really unsure about what's after. So, I was amazed at how even infants weep as they leave the womb. Weeping because they come out from darkness into light. Notice the imagery that he uses there. Birth from the womb to the world is really a metaphor for death from this world into a greater world. From darkness, here, the dungeon, into light. It's Plato's allegory of the cave. Okay? And from suffocation, they issue forth into this world. That is where they take great, big, deep, gulping breaths. Likewise, death too is for the world a symbol of birth. And yet people weep because they are born out of this world. Now, if what St. Ephrem says is true, and people are born out of this world, then where are they born into? The real world. That is, what is the purpose of the child in the womb? And it's not to stay there. Would be very uncomfortable for the mother if the child were to stay there. Okay? It is to properly grow and develop and take up its abode here. Therefore, life here is what? Preparation. Okay? It's entirely preparation. And he's going to talk about what one must do to prepare later on. He's talked about it a little bit. He's going to talk about it a little bit more. And yet people weep because they are born out of this world, the mother of suffering, into the garden of splendors. Well, that's the kick, isn't it? I mean, that's the hitch. We don't know that we are born into the garden of splendors. So how does one ensure that one is born into the garden of splendor? Not splinters, splendors. Okay? Preparation. Well, what's the preparation? Virtuous living. Well, how does one live virtuously? Right choices, as he will say later on. Okay? So you get hymn 6. What enables one to be sure one will be born into the garden of splendors? The keys of doctrine which unlock all of Scripture's books have opened up before the book of creation, the treasure house of the ark, the crown of the law. All right? So he says the keys of doctrine. Well, what's he mean by doctrine? Right belief. Okay? And for Ephrem, right belief is the belief of the Father's Church. Ignatius, Athanasius, etc. Okay? Notice he says that does what? It opens up, it unlocks Scripture's books. So, what does one need, according to St. Ephrem, in order to understand Scripture? Is it like Martin Luther or John Calvin said? A single individual with their Bible, sola scriptura, the Bible alone and nothing else? No. Because where does the doctrine come from? The doctrine doesn't come from the Bible. The doctrine comes from the church, which interprets the Bible. Okay? So where does the Bible come from? The Bible comes from the church. The church is what determines this is a canonical book. This is not a canonical book. The Proto-Evangelion of James that I have on the syllabus is obviously not one of the books of the New Testament. Why? Because the church determined it was not. Okay? Well, what church? The early church, not the later church. Because the later church, obviously, at this time, doesn't exist. Okay? So he goes on, talks about the book of creation. What does doctrine do? It not only opens up the books of Scripture, it opens up the book of creation. That is, it enables me to properly understand what I see all around me. Whoever brought the flowers in. That the flowers are themselves images of something else. The flowers are themselves symbolic. Because for St. Ephrem, everything is symbolic. Okay? Everything has deeper meaning. So the book of creation, the treasure house of the ark, and there I think he means the literal ark, whether we're talking about the ark of Noah or the ark of the covenant, okay? The crown of the law. All right? This is a book which, above its companions, has in its narrative made the Creator perceptible and transmitted his actions. It has envisioned all his craftsmanship, made manifest his works of art. Okay? So, when he says this is a book which book is he talking about?
Talking about Exodus?
Yeah. Well, no, Genesis. Talking about the book of the paradise. Okay? Well, and what is paradise? Paradise includes the book of nature. It includes the book of the law. It includes the ark. That is, paradise kind of subsumes everything else. All right? So, blessed is he who through his cross has flung open paradise. Keep in mind, paradise was closed by the cherub with the fiery sword. But the cross now opens up paradise. And this is pretty important, I think, to St. Ephrem and some of the other fathers. Because there's no longer a gate. That is, there's no longer a gate keeping anybody out from paradise. So what does that mean? Those who aren't in paradise, why aren't they?
So they don't choose out.
Because they don't want to be. They choose something else. I was listening to thing the other day. It's a thing I've listened to many times before, and the priest who's actually speaking it makes this comment. That George Bernard Shaw said. I've never checked this, but I believe that it's true. That George Bernard Shaw said, great dramatist, early 20th century, that hell is the place where people will have to do what they want to do. Think about that for a moment. Hell is where you will have to do what you want to do, rather than where others want you to do. We kind of think of, having to do things that other people require as that being hellish. What Shaw is saying there, and Shaw didn't believe in heaven or hell, by the way. What Shaw is suggesting there is that it's the emphasis on the I, the me, what I want.
That's that episode of The Twilight Zone.
Which episode?
Oh, you don't remember
They're all
that? There's
like
this episode of The Twilight Zone where this man is a bank robber, right? He shows up in this beautiful place. And
I've
it's
seen part of that.
he gets shown to this room, and he has servants wait on him hand and foot, and they bring him all this food, women and stuff, and he's great, and they tell him he's dead, everything, he at one point he says, well, I want to rob a bank, and they're like, oh, okay, sure, they set up a bank, and they
Takes all the fun out of it.
and he's like, no, and so he wants to do some pool, but of course everybody lets him win, and everything, and he goes, oh, this is ridiculous. I can't have any fun here because everything's set up for me. He goes, I don't want to be in heaven anymore. I want to go to the other place. And the guy looks at him and goes,
You're in the other place.
This is the other place.
Yeah, that's good. Is that the old?
Yeah, the old
one. Okay.
Yeah.
Go on to stanza 3 there in hymn 6, and notice what he says. Paradise surrounds the limbs with its many delights, the eyes with its handiwork, the hearing with its sounds, the mouth and the nostrils with its taste and sense. Okay, emphasizing what? Sensation. It's sensual. In other words, spirit doesn't smell. Spirit doesn't taste. Spirit doesn't feel. So, paradise is a place for bodies. Is the message he's communicating here. It is physical. Is it a heightened sense of physicality? Yes, it's a spiritualized sense, if you want, of physicality. But it is meant to be appreciated, physically. Why? Well, because the early fathers emphasize again and again and again the goodness of matter, the goodness of the body, that the body is not evil, thus throwing them in opposition to the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, and a whole bunch of others. Notice, blessed is the person who has gathered for himself the company of all who have kept vigil and fasted. Kept vigil means have prayed. They, in return for their fasts, what? Shall delight to graze upon its luxurious pastures. In other words, you fast a little while here, and what do you get in paradise? Feasting galore. There will be no fasting in paradise. Why? Fasting is done here for what reason? Preparation. It's preparation. Is it done because the body is evil? Because the body is bad? No. Fasting is done here to teach the body that it is not in control. To teach the body that it's not the most important thing. That the most important thing is the union of the soul and the body. And the soul ought to have supremacy over the body. So, one fasts, it's like being an athlete. If you've been an athlete, if you've ever trained for a race or something, the word I just used, you have to train. You can't wake up one morning unless you're one of a handful of people in the world. There are literally a handful of people that can do this. You can't wake up one morning and decide you're going to run a marathon that day. Okay? It takes training. It usually takes months of training. Because if you get up that morning and try to run a marathon, either you're going to stop after a few miles or you're going to kill yourself. All right? So what do? You train yourself. Well, what's involved in that training? You're pushing your body. You're controlling your body. If you've ever been a runner, I used to run marathons. I'm getting back into running now. But you reach a point on a long run where most people do, where you reach a point on a long run, a 20-mile run, where your body says, okay, it's enough. Stop now. But the spirit has got to say, no, I've got 6 more miles to do. And I've got to speed up these last 6 miles. Okay? Body wants to stop entirely. But because there is what? Ahead of you. Goal. The goal is to get this training done. Or the goal is this marathon. So what do? You push and push and push. Body doesn't like it, so you stop it. Okay? You don't stop the body. You stop the pain, etc. Fasting is the exact same thing. And vigil, by the way. Okay? Because when he says we have kept vigil and fasted, he doesn't mean just, sat there and prayed for 10 seconds. Where Jesus, help me, overcome this difficulty I'm now having. That's not vigil. Vigil is a long of prayers or a long prayer service. And long doesn't mean 15 minutes. Early church, even up through like the Russian church even today, vigil can be hours of prayers. Okay? So that's what he's talking about. Paradise raised me up as I perceived it. It enriched me as I meditated upon it. That is, as he looked into paradise, the very looking into it, the very understanding of it, he says, elevates him. Okay? And as he thinks upon it, it enriches him. It does what? It makes him a better person just thinking about it. Okay? I forgot my poor estate, for it had made me drunk with its fragrance. Okay? Skip down to the end of that stanza. I became so inebriated that I forgot all my sins there. What does inebriated mean? Drunk. Drunk with what? Glory. Drunk with glory. So full of awe. So literally full, filled, overflowing, lost control because of that sense of awe and mystery. He says that I forgot all my sins. Okay? Do I want to go over that? Yeah, look at the next stanza. Talking about, he still beholding paradise. In its fair beauty I beheld those who are far more beautiful than it, and I reflected. Okay, now he has just said, paradise is so beautiful he was drunk on its beauty, and it made him forget his sins. But then he beheld those who are even more beautiful than paradise, and it caused him to reflect. That is, to think about, to meditate. If paradise is so glorious, how much more glorious should Adam be? Because Adam wasn't made for paradise. Paradise was made for Adam. How much more glorious should those who inhabit paradise be than paradise itself? It's what Christ meant when he said, man was not made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man. The rest was made for man. So, how much more glorious should Adam be, who is in the image of its planter, God? And how much fairer the cross upon which the Son of its Lord rode? That is, how much fairer the cross than the tree of knowledge? Okay. Go to stanza 7. Unless there's something in 6 you want to ask about. God planted the fair garden. He built the pure church. Okay. So we have paradise and the church being linked. Upon the tree of knowledge, he established the injunction, that is, the law, don't eat. He gave joy, but they took no delight. He gave joy, that is, everything in the garden, keep in mind. You can eat of anything you want. Don't touch this tree. Notice, according to St. Ephrem's kind of topography of paradise, they didn't see the tree of life. All right? So, he gave joy, but they took no delight. They didn't take delight in the joy that was offered. Why? Because they could have had everything, but they wanted the one thing that wasn't allowed. Yes?
Watermelon.
Yeah.
Now, did Ephrem come up with this topography? This arrangement of paradise, or were there?
I don't think so. I think Brock says in the introduction that the notion isn't unique to him, that it's Syriac in origin.
Okay. I remember reading something in the introduction, like about predecessors, but I couldn't remember.
Right.
I was trying to remember if I just sort of made that up.
Now, in terms of the separation of the trees, so that the tree of life was unknown to them, that I don't know. I don't know if
the mountain was something.
Yeah, I don't know if he's creating that distinction or if there are earlier writers that do that. It'd be a good thing to investigate.
Definitely be very influential later on.
Yeah.
You get to Dante.
Oh yeah, really, really influential. So he gave joy, they took no delight. He gave admonition, but they were unafraid. Okay, and in the church, so this is all paradise. In the church, he implanted the word, Christ, which causes rejoicing with its promises, which causes fear with its warnings. That is, think of the promises of Christ. They would provide joy to one who believed them. Look at some of the words of Christ. They should imply fear, like Matthew 25. If you're familiar with the parable of the final judgment, okay, where Christ says at the end, I'm going to separate the people into the left hand, the right hand, the sheep and the goats. And the goats will go off the left hand, go off into everlasting punishment. The sheep will go into the right hand, off into heaven. And they're kind of like, well, what's going to be the criteria? And he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, but then he goes on and talks about those who fed the hungry, clothed the naked, visited the widows, visited the orphans, visited those in prison. Okay? And he's going to say, you've done it, and they're going to say, Lord, when did we do it unto you? And he says, inasmuch as you did it unto the least of these, my brethren, okay, you did it to me. And then those that get sent into hell, when didn't we? In that you didn't feed me, clothe me, all those kinds of things, okay? That kind of, comment there, I think St. Ephrem is suggesting, that ought to cause fear. So, he who despises the word perishes. He who takes warning, okay, and word there, notice it's multiple ambiguities, okay? He who takes warning lives. The assembly of saints bears resemblance to paradise. What does he mean by the assembly of saints? It's the church. That's what the church is. The church exists when the saints assemble. The church doesn't exist in and of itself on its own out there. It only exists when people come together to do the work of the church. Okay? So, in each day is plucked the fruit of him who gives life to all. That is, in each day of the assembly of saints. Well, what's the fruit that's plucked? The Eucharist, the communion meal. In it is trodden the cluster of grapes to be the medicine of life. He's talking about one of the elements right there of the Eucharist. Okay? The serpent is crippled and bound by the curse. And you got a footnote down there. What's the curse? He shall bruise thy head and you shall, wound his heel. When Eve's mouth is sealed with a silence that is beneficial, but it also serves once again as a harp to sing the praises of her Creator. Notice Eve's mouth is shut. Why Eve's? She's the one who goes to Adam. It's not Satan that goes to Adam. It's Eve.
Right. So her mouth is shut because.
She's the one who tempted Adam.
Right.
Now, the same priest I was listening to in this other tape, he talks about, how a lot of the early fathers are a lot easier on Eve than they are on Adam. I think he says it's Saint Irenaeus of Lyon who says this. Because think about this. Adam is tempted by Eve, an equal.
Right.
Who's Eve tempted by? Yeah, Satan himself, a supernatural being. You can blame Adam much greater than you can Eve, because really, supernatural being who doesn't appear like the horns and everything. Who's not going to give in, kind of a thing. Okay.
I wonder what would have happened if Adam had been tempted by the serpent first.
I'm sure there's a novel out there that talks about it. Let's see here.
Where that talks about them, not having sin in the first place. Paralandra.
Yeah, Paralandra does.
Except for that one, they're green.
Which is and keep in mind, Paralandra is Lewis's rewriting of Paradise Lost.
Yeah.
Because before Lewis wrote Paralandra, he wrote a preface to Paradise Lost, which was a scholarly book about Milton's Paradise Lost. And one of the main things he argues in there is that Milton depicted God too clearly. Milton's God is too obvious. He's seen too much. When the angels are down on the lake of fire, we get this, meanwhile, back in heaven, and we see God up there sitting on his throne, and he's just smirking. So it's not a very positive image. And so what Lewis determined was, okay, what we need a Paradise Lost where God is much more mysterious.
Yeah.
Where he's there, but you never see him. You never physically hear him, kind of a thing. So in Paradise Lost, what is he? He's a presence, a voice in Ransom's ear and such. For those of you who've read Paradise
Am I
Lost.
the only one, by the way?
That's
Okay.
because
Yeah, she took my Inklings course.
Is that in there? In the
Yeah, I do.
Lewis course? Okay.
Let's see here. Stanza 10. So, how does one get into paradise? The effort of free will that adorns the church with all manner of fruits. Meaning, free will, the effort of free will, the putting forth of free will, and the implication is properly, results in all manner of fruits. Okay? Probably he's talking about, I don't know this for sure, but probably I think he's talking about the fruits of the Spirit that St. Paul talks about. The Creator saw the church and was pleased. He resided in that paradise, that is, the church, which she had planted for his honor. Okay? What does Christ say? Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I. All right? Just as he had planted the garden of paradise, for her, the church's delight. The church who? The church triumphant. Those who remain faithful and such. So the diligent carry their own fruits. What does that word diligent mean?
Vigil.
No, it's not from vigil. Hard workers. The industrious ones. Hardworking how? With their free will. Okay? They carry their fruits and run forward to meet paradise. They enter the garden with what? Glorious deeds. Okay? What are the glorious deeds? They're virtuous actions. So what are the virtuous actions? Any action that is good. Any action that is born out of love for others. Okay? Skip the next one and go to stanza 13. The fruits of the righteous were more pleasing to the knower of all, that is God, than the fruits and produce of the trees. Well, why? What are the fruits of the righteous? What are the fruits of the Spirit?
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, long-suffering.
Gentleness, self-control is one of them. There's, 13 of them?
I
never
rhythm,
can.
love, joy, peace, because the Sunday school rhythm, and then
Not
I
fresh.
apart.
F-R-U-I-C. Fruits of...
Yeah, I'm sure there's a song.
Fruits of the Spirit. Come on. But the fruit of the Spirit is... Come on, open
Have you
up.
ever noticed that I don't know if I'm the only one who knows this, but have you ever noticed in Sunday school they tend to focus on very trivial things?
Save topics.
No, it's really small.
Oh,
Love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Okay?
Oh, so we did get one.
From Galatians 5:22. All right? They're more pleasing than the fruits and produce of the trees. The beauty that exists in nature does what? It extols the human mind. What does that mean, it extols? It praises the human mind. And paradise lauded the intellect. In other words, what he seems to be saying is that the beauty that is in nature is saying, I'm not as beautiful as that, as the human mind. Okay? The flowers, like these daffodils, gave praise to virtuous life, because the virtuous life leads to even greater beauty. The garden to free will, and the earth to human thought. Notice the three ideas there. Flowers praise virtuous life, the garden praises free will, and the earth praises human thought. Okay? So what do we have? Virtuous life, free will, human thought. Okay? Notice, free will needs to be enacted how? Virtuously. Thought must enact virtuously, because you can have unvirtuous thoughts, obviously. Okay? And unvirtuous thoughts can lead to unvirtuous actions. Okay? Stanza 15. If the beauty of paradise, what does that word astonishment literally mean? To be turned into stone. Okay? Astonied is what it means. If it strikes us with astonishment, how much more should we be astonished at the beauty of the mind? Okay? So, beauty of paradise compared to beauty of the mind. And he says it shouldn't be. One is the product of nature, the beauty of paradise. The other is the product of the will. That is, a beautiful mind is what? Made through hard work. Nature is made beautiful, maybe not today, but these flowers, they can't help but be beautiful. It is in their nature, in their genes. The human mind, is it nature or is it nurture? 2 children, 6 months of age, try and get the Institutional Review Board to pass this one. For children 6 months of age, put one in a family where the child is told from 6 months of age to 18. You are wonderful. You are loved. You are worthy. If you try, you can do anything you want. You can achieve any goal. Okay? And the child is given the means to achieve those goals. I don't mean that they're given carte blanche. I mean given opportunities to try themselves, to prove themselves. Do that with one child. The other child, from the age of 6 months, that says, you're a worthless piece of you-know-what. We don't love you. You will never amount to anything. You're worthless. And have them told that from 6 months age every day to 18. How are these two individuals going to turn out? No. This one is going to succeed at pretty much what he or she attempts in life. And this one is not going to attempt anything. There will be no hard. Why? Because of what the child is told. Okay? That's not nature. That's entirely. Is nature completely unimportant? No. Because obviously, if you have an IQ of 70, you're not going to be fine. It's physically impossible. Similarly, if you are 5 feet 5 inches tall, you're not going to play in the NBA. Okay? It's just. Sorry, Robert. It's how it's going to be.
I know it.
So,
Well, did you want to play in the NBA?
I would have liked the choice.
Paul was envious of the garden, and from itself brought forth victorious fruits, whose crowns vanquished the very splendors of paradise. Okay? Free will was envious of the garden. What does that mean? The garden became beautiful without having to think. Free will is saying here, it would have been nice to be able to get the fruits that I wanted without having to work. The 2 marathons I've run, it would have been nice to have been able to run those without having to train. Okay. Go on. I'm skipping a bunch now.
Muggsy Bogues was 5'3".
Who?
Bogues.
In NBA?
Spud Webb was 5'7".
I knew Spud Webb, which is why I said 5'5". I didn't know Muggsy. Bud was pretty amazing in his day, too.
Wait, when was this?
Spud Webb, 80s.
Yeah, maybe.
5'7", he could dunk. Just amazing to watch.
What did that look like?
Yeah, it was amazing to watch. Okay, go up to stanza 23. Talking about to paradise, one of them cleft the air with his chariot. Okay, Elijah. The watchers, that is the angels, rejoiced as they met him, seeing that a body had taken up its abode among them, meaning a body. Because what happened to Elijah? He didn't die. Okay. And just as an earthly being ascended in a chariot and put on splendor, so did the Lord in his grace descend, put on a body. That is, that which is immaterial, spirit, okay, not spirit in the sense that an angel is a spirit, but without matter being, okay, did what? Descended and put on a body. Just like Elijah did and put on spirit, as it were, okay. He then mounted a cloud, not a chariot, mounted a cloud, the ascension, and ascended to reign over high and low. Okay. Stanza 7. Look at towards the end of hymn 7. Look at the end of the first stanza. Talking about Christ now, because stanza 6 introduced Christ. Okay. So he has surrendered his own son for us so that we might believe in him. That is, for God so loved, John 3:16. His body is with us. Wait a second. I thought his body ascended into heaven on the ascension. His literal body did ascend into heaven at the ascension. But his figurative body, the church, is with us. He came and his keys. Well, what were his keys? His doctrines, his teachings. Okay? Someone strikes you on the left cheek, give them the right cheek also. Someone steals your coat, give them your shirt also. Okay? Return good for evil, all those kinds of things. See who, with his keys, has opened up the garden of life. That is, with his teachings. Okay? So again, what do we see? The door is open. The angel with the fiery sword, no longer there. You want to enter paradise? You can enter. You have to do something. Okay? It's not just, kind of carte blanche, just come on in. All right? And then I'm going to skip a bunch. Talking about the variety of people who go into heaven. Okay. Stanza 4, the poor man. Stanza 5, men and women clothed in raiment of light. Garments to cover their nakedness are swallowed up in glory, etc., etc. Stanza 6, virginity or virgins. Stanza 7, young people. Stanza 8, married people. So including all the orders of society. Okay? The young, the old, the virgins, the unvirgins, meaning the married. Okay? Stanza 9, young children. Okay? Plucked while still young, the children who are the late fruits to become in paradise the first fruits of all. Right? Old age, stanza 10. Stanza 9, those who were crippled on earth. I think this is just a way of saying, and those who want to say, oh, well, if you're not perfect in body and in form, you can't go into heaven. Because what was a central tenet of Platonism, Platonic thought, is the outside appearance of a person is symbolic of their interior state. So if somebody's beautiful outside, it means they're beautiful on the inside. And if somebody's ugly and deformed on the outside, it means they're ugly and deformed on the inside. Horrendous, ideology if you come to think about it. Okay. Skipping a bunch more. I mean, there are some things here I thought I'd talk about, but I'm just going to skip them. No, I take that back. Stanza 18. Okay. Earlier, he goes from talking about classes of people, that is in kind of terms of age and marital status and all that kind of stuff. 13, he talks about the cripples. And then in 14, he talks about those whose their actions now, okay, who keep their eyes pure by not glancing, okay, who keep their mouths pure by not saying things they shouldn't say, kind of following on the book of James, okay. 15, virgins who reject the marriage crown. Why? Because they're married to Christ, etc. Again, that's a decision. That's a choice. That's acting out of free will. Those who fast. And then we get 17. Whoever has washed the feet of the saints will himself be cleansed in that dew. What dew? The water that was used to wash the feet of the saints. Okay, now who are the saints that he's talking about? Where in the New Testament do you have people washing the feet of the saints? Peter, James, John, the other saints. Christ. Okay? Just after the Last Supper. Okay? So is he talking about those saints, the apostles? Just hold that thought. Whoever has washed the feet of the saints will himself be cleansed in that dew. To the hand that is stretched out to give to the poor will the trees themselves stretch out. The very footsteps of him who visited the sick in their affliction. To the flowers make haste to blooms, jostling to see which can be first to kiss his steps. The saints are the poor and the sick and the needy. Inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it unto me. When he says that, he means Christ is in everyone. Okay? So, if you've washed the feet of the saints, you've washed the feet of the poor. And foot washing here is not only a sign of welcoming somebody into your home, it's a sign of humility. Because keep in mind, people in biblical times walked around with sandals on. They didn't walk on paved roads. They walked on dirt roads. So their feet would get crusted with dirt as they sweat, and then the dust piles on them, and then they sweat some more. Okay? So washing someone's feet was really a sign of humility and love towards those people. So the man who abstained, next stanza, okay, from wine, etc. Those who have been crowned for our Lord's sake with the martyr's death, that is, those who overcame through martyrdom. All right? Stanza 22 and 23. This is one of the longest hymns there is, by the way. toil. So we've gotten all these descriptions of people who have attained to paradise. None toil there, for none go hungry. That is, you don't have to work the garden anymore. All right? None endure shame there. Why? Because nobody does wrong. None feel condemned there. Why? Because there's no cause for repentance. Those who run the course, listen to the imagery there. Those who run the race find rest and quiet. Rest and quiet are what are at the end of the race. None grow old and die there. None are buried there, for none are born there. They know no worry. They have no suffering. They have no fear. No snare awaits them. That is, no, you get to paradise and the serpent shows up to kind of,
And the whole thing starts again.
Yeah, if you've ever read Stephen King's Dark Tower.
Yeah.
Horrible ending.
I like
Yeah, I got it too, but it's like, what?
it's a little
I
different.
just spent months reading these, or years in the case. For people from when they first. No, I'm not going to go into it.
Is he chasing Walter O'Dim at the end as well?
They know no worry. They have no adversary. You have to read it. You have to read. You'll have to read it. They have passed through the contest. They count themselves blessed. They have taken up their crowns and found rest. What's the history of the Old Testament for the Jews? They never enter into their rest. They're always moving, either to somewhere or from somewhere, because they've screwed up or they're being brought back from having screwed up, kind of a thing. So he says, I saw that place and I sat down and wept for myself and for those like me, and how my days have reached their fill. Reached their fill how? Dissipated one by one, faded out, stolen away without my noticing. What does he mean? What's he done with his days? I won't assume that that any of you have done this, but I'll say I have, where he has literally wasted an entire day. Used to be you do it on TV. Now it's on the internet, where you sit there and you're just searching or browsing or reading the same stuff over and over and over. That's what he means. Stolen away without my noticing. And you suddenly look at your watch or you hear a phone and you get up and you realize, my God, I just spent 4 hours doing nothing. Okay? How blessed is the person who of that heavenly table, that is, paradise, is held worthy. So he prays that all the children of light make supplication for him there. Well, children of light, he doesn't mean children. He means all the sons and daughters of God. That I would have renewed occasion to praise him. That is, to practice my will. To choose to do these things. Okay? And if none who is defiled can enter that place, to at least let me live, on those lower enclosures. So that when the blows from paradise, I can get a breath of fresh air, as it were. Okay? Talks about the parable of the rich man. 28, he wants to live by the enclosure of the 29, troubles of Gehenna. And then 31, a man's neighbor become his God every moment he seeks to please him. Okay, well, isn't that a good thing? Trying to please your neighbor?
What stanza is this again? 28?
31, the last one. If he does wrong, he feels shame before him. That is, if he does wrong and his neighbor is aware, he feels shame before his neighbor. If he does him an injury, he's afraid. If he does him some good, then he's afraid that he has spoiled that good by his thirst for praise. Such a man has become an abject slave in all these ways. That's how the person becomes his God. He lives his life, what? To make others happy. The good one gave us freedom, but we have reduced this to slavery. Seems to me like that's a way of saying, rephrasing, what Polonius tells his son Laertes in Hamlet. After he gives him a series of advice, he says, and this above all. Anybody know what the rest is? To thine own self be true. And it follows that therefore one can never be false to another. Okay? So what does he mean?
Which is weird because if you think Lonnie's is really good at giving advice.
Oh yeah, he just doesn't follow it all. May we exchange for your lordship this overlord we've made for ourselves. Well, what's this overlord? Or subservience to this world. In other words, it's not our neighbor, it's God. Now, maybe pleasing our neighbor will be pleasing to God. But when the neighbor becomes the reason why we live. Update this, I think, from what he's saying here. Because how do we try to please our neighbor today? And I don't think it's really pleasing. We try to one-up, keeping up with the Smiths or the Joneses kind of thing. They get a new truck, you get a new truck. They get a new that, you get a new. They get a new house, you buy a new house. Okay?
If you buy a new house,
You become slave to what? The possessions. Okay? Hymn 8, if I have anything.
this
Trying to
is
get
where
his-
that concept of soul, the sleep of the soul.
Yeah, as much of it as I can. Thinking about the thief. The early church tells us this guy's name was Dismas. Saint Dismas. Okay? On the cross. The one who chides the other thief for saying, yeah, if you're Christ, get yourself and take us to it. Saint Dismas says, what are you saying? He doesn't deserve what he's getting. And he says to Christ, Lord, remember me in your kingdom. And Christ says, this day you will be with me in paradise. And so what St. Ephrem goes on is this big, long thing to essentially say, Christ did that. I mean, personally, I've got a bit of a problem with here. Because he says, this day you shall be with me in paradise. How does he understand that to mean? Not really.
Yeah, because he sees paradise. He can't see paradise in the absence of the body. Therefore, you would have to be in repose until the time of the resurrection. Otherwise,
Exactly.
you wouldn't have a body in order to inhabit paradise.
Paradise is only for resurrected bodies. Or Elijah, Enoch. Got to be kind of lonely there then, okay? It's because it is a place of sensual pleasure and delight, all right?
Beta testers
Yeah.
of the afterlife, if you will.
But notice what he says there in stanza 3. In this place of joys, anguish sees me as I realize that it's not profitable to delve into hidden things. In other words, don't go asking questions about things you shouldn't ask questions. This is one of the shortest hymns there is. I think this is his way of saying, I could be entirely wrong here. I don't know if there's any research that suggests, but it's almost like maybe somebody said, could you deal with the issue of St. Dismas? Because I'm really having trouble with it. Okay, I'll work that into a song. That the soul cannot...
I keep forgetting that these are songs. Like,
Yeah,
can you imagine like singing the song? About,
these
like,
are...
like you're singing the song and like I just finished singing this song. I think Ephrem's a little divided on this issue. Like,
Okay.
Maybe he should wait to make
So-
a song about things that he's more confident about.
He says, in stanza 6, the soul in the body is like an embryo. Okay? So what's the soul without the body? It's disembodied. In other words, the soul goes with the period. So I think where I would suggest his problem lies is in linking, and I understand why he does, in linking so strongly the soul has to be with the body. And it's because arguing against the Manichaeans and the Gnostics, and even to some extent the Arians, okay, who want to say, there was a time when Christ was not. All right? So I think he's wanting to really link those tightly together. Not seeing, what does it mean to be in the bosom of Abraham? The bosom of Abraham, scripturally speaking, is paradise, is with God. Okay? So when Lazarus goes, he's with God there. Not with God in his resurrected form, not with God as he's ultimately going. Okay? But mentally, however you describe it, okay? His awareness, you could say, this is with God. The body still has to come. In other words, paradise will not be perfect, will not be complete until the bodies are all resurrected. Okay? So he says, stanza 11, thus in the delightful mansions on the borders of paradise, the souls of the just and righteous reside, awaiting there the bodies they love, so that at the opening of the garden's gate, bodies and souls can march on in. Okay?
What is this again?
Last stanza 11. Okay, go on to, let's see here. Number 9, stanza 6, since we've been talking about Paralandra. Stanza 6 seems to me like a pretty good description of Lewis's Paralandra. And there's nothing that indicates St. Louis. There's nothing that indicates C.S. read anything of Ephrem the Syrian. Such is the flowing brook of delights that as one tree takes leave of you, the next one. When Ransom is walking on these floating islands, he'll experience the fruit of one tree and then he'll see something off in the distance and he'll want to go try it. That you should partake of the fruit of one and suck the juice of another, wash and cleanse yourself in the dew of yet a third. On the land of Paralandra, the world of Paralandra, there are these trees that produce drops of water that when you go, it's like a baptism. You're immediately cleansed. Your mind is refreshed. You see things better. It's exactly what he's doing here. Okay, it's very, very odd. Go to stanza 19. Like I said, I'm trying to get through as many of these as we can. Stanza 19. Talking about bodies, paradise, or after death, or with resurrection, they receive refinement there after the manner of souls. Thought 2, that is refined, will be purified, whose movements are ever in a state of disturbance. Why are thoughts in a state of disturbance? What does he mean of disturbance?
Anxieties, fears.
Okay. What else? How often have you tried, to really, quote unquote, still your mind? I mean, placid. What often happens?
More chaos or upset.
Okay.
That's what it does.
A thought pops into you. Okay. It's like people sometimes, they'll go to church and they try to remain focused on church or whatever. And thinking about their homework assignment, they're thinking about work, they're thinking about carp. Okay. That's what he means. That thoughts are in a state of disturbance. We find it very, very difficult to focus entirely and to maintain focus. So, what will happen in paradise? Thought will become unperturbed. In complete rest. Passionless, in other words. There will be no other desires. It will be familiar with Harry Potter. It will be like being put under an imperious curse. Where somebody else thinks for you. Familiar with Harry Potter. What is Harry's experience when he's put under the imperious curse? By the false Mad-Eye Moody. Bliss. We have a phrase, ignorance is bliss. What does that mean? If you don't know, you don't care. Okay? So he goes on from there. He's moved from the body to thought, now to the soul. Far more glorious than the body is the soul. This is stanza 20. And more glorious still than the soul is the spirit. And what he might mean by this, by spirit, I'm not positive, and I haven't checked, is that he might mean this word, the nous. Okay, it's a Greek. It kind of means the heart of one's being. Okay? Not a literal heart. And more hidden than the spirit is the Godhead. At the end, the body will put on the beauty of the soul. The soul will put on that of the spirit. Okay? While the spirit shall put on the very likeness of God's majesty. That's that process of theosis, of deification. Okay? Bodies shall be raised to the level of souls. That is, bodies will become like. They'll still be physical, but they'll be like souls, able to do, for example, what Christ did after the. And the souls will be raised to the level of spirit, and the spirit will be raised to the height of God's majesty, clinging to awe and love, if neither circles too high nor holds back too much. That is, awe and love circle neither much. Okay, go on. I'm going to skip a bunch here. Stanza 26, since we only have 10 minutes left and 6 more hymns. Accordingly, as each here on earth purifies, notice what we see happening in each of these kind of couplets. Accordingly, as each here on earth purifies, does he become more able to behold his incomparable glory. So, in order to behold God's incomparable glory, where does the process begin? Here. This is where the purification begins. Accordingly, as the earth opens his ear to him. Why eyes and ears? He who has ears to hear, let him. He who has eyes to see, let him see. Okay. Seeing and hearing in the scripture are equated with understanding, perceiving. So does he become, that is, if you develop your ears, so does he become more able to grasp his wisdom. Okay? So, seeing, behold, hearing, grasp, accordingly as each here on earth prepares a receptacle. What? How do you prepare a receptacle for God? So is he enabled to carry a small portion of his. Well, what's the receptacle? The body. How? Partaking of the Eucharist. Participating in the communion meal. You take God into yourself, and in so doing, you are making a receptacle. And thus, you are enabled to carry a small portion of his riches. Deification idea. Why? Why a small portion? Because God will always be forever other. Humanity raised, humanity divinized, will never be by nature what God is by nature. They will become what God is by nature, but they'll never fully become that. They will
continually advance.
Continually.
To it.
Here says, move from glory to glory, but never arrive at, I don't know, gloriousness, the end.
Last station of pi.
Yeah, whatever. The final prime, kind of a, whatever that is. Okay? So, the Lord measure does what? And notice how this follows beautifully from that previous stanza. The Lord who is beyond measure measures out nourishment to all. It's beyond all measure, beyond all counting. Okay? So what does he do? You get a little bit, you get a little bit, you get. And in pouring that out, that word that I used a week or two ago, kenosis, that emptying of himself, okay, he never becomes empty. It's a continual pouring out And the continual pouring out results in the continual, the ever-raising glory to glory, further up, farther up, farther in. I can never remember Lewis's phrasing.
Real quick before I forget, what's your YouTube channel's name?
Just search for Ted Sherman. There's one to get rid of, but it's too much of a pain. So I'm just uploading stuff to this other one. Okay, stanza 10. Hymn 10. 9 minutes, 8 minutes to go.
Let's read every line.
Yeah. At the very end is 14 and 15. He's been talking about all the people who are going to end up in paradise, and he's also earlier talked about the seasons in paradise. Which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but okay. Talking about the seasons, how the seasons in paradise are not like the seasons on earth. In other words, you're not going to go from 70 degrees one day, like it was yesterday, to 48 degrees in 2 days, like it's going to be tomorrow. Okay? No. January produces fruit.
What was the temperature
In paradise.
like in Syria?
Oh, it ranges. Yeah, I mean, it gets really hot in the summer. Because I had a friend who fought in Fallujah, which is near Syria, when it was like 120 degrees. But at night, even during the winter, during the summer, I mean, if you've ever been in a desert, you drop down to freezing. And then during the winter, it gets even colder than that. So, blessed the sinner, stanza 14, who is received there and is deemed worthy to be given access to the environs of paradise. Even though he remains outside, he may pasture there grace. That is, he's not in paradise itself. He's on the borders. As I reflected, I was fearful again because I was doomed to suppose that there might be between the garden and the fire a place where those who have found mercy can receive chastisement and forgiveness. Well, what's the purpose of chastisement?
To turn away from
Correction. It's to change you. Okay. So what he's suggesting here is, and notice he uses that English word, presumed. He's saying, here's paradise, here's Gehenna, or hell, and I kind of presume that there's a middle ground somewhere. That is, not all those who don't make it to paradise are automatically in hell. Why? Not because of something they've done. He says it's because of grace. Pure and simple. Okay? So, praise to the just one. Think about that. He never draws in the limits of his goodness. It's very McDonaldian. George MacDonald. Okay?
Yeah. No. Yeah, he says there's this middle ground. Now, Dante had this idea of, as well as there being multiple levels of heaven, obviously he came up with the
seven levels of purgatory.
Right, and then then there's the
nine levels in hell.
So is this idea, because obviously Ephrem believes that there's a continual progress upward in heaven. Would he also imagine a continual progress in hell?
That I don't know. I really don't. Simply because the speak very little about hell. And I don't want to make too broad of a generalization here, but I'm going to. Anyways. Hell really is much more interesting for Western theologians. And even Western fathers. Okay? They seem much more interested in what happens in hell than do the fathers of the Middle Eastern area. They seem much more, I don't know, hopeful, generous, merciful. In other words, they seem to emphasize much more God's mercy than you see God's justice. So that in the later medieval church, which is entirely Western, you have two very jarring God. And by God there, I mean God the Father and God the Son. You've got the juridical justice-loving, judgmental God the Father, who really wants to get people, reaches its apex really in Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands.
Yeah.
I mean, just think of that sermon. What a mind-blowing thing out of hell that thing is. Okay? My opinion. Okay. And the Eastern writers almost never, or the Middle Eastern writers almost never deal with hell. Largely what they say is we shouldn't speculate about that which we don't know. And we know very little about hell. Where it is described, it's very figurative, metaphorical language.
In very broad terms. Like, it's not even the metaphorical language isn't as specific as heaven. Where, they don't talk about, they talk about streets of gold.
There's a place of gnashing of teeth. It's eternal torment. Lake of fire from Revelation, but not okay. It's just, it's not a good place to be, kind of a thing. But notice what he says here in stanza 15, where he talks about the limits of God's goodness. Even to the wicked he stretches forth in his compassion. Even to the wicked, God does what? He doesn't just kind of look and smile. Notice the action that's involved. Stretches. What does that mean? Really reaches out. That's that idea of kenosis, of emptying himself. Language that's used frequently in fathers of the church and in the Orthodox Church is condescension. What does it mean to condescend to somebody? We don't like it when people are condescending, right? What does it mean when somebody's condescending to you?
They sort of act like they are going out of their way to
Treat you lower than you really
or
are.
to bring themselves to your level.
Okay, exactly. They treat you lower than themselves. So when God condescends, it really is condescending. Okay? Because the con part means with, and descending means he's coming down to our level. The greatest act of condescension is actually a lifting up. It's the raising on the cross. Okay? Identifying all the sins of the world, etc. His divine cloud hovers over all that is his. It drips even on that fire of punishment, so that of his mercy it enables even the embittered to taste of the refreshment. Now, we could spend an entire semester just talking, what is he talking about? Because that is a notion that is totally foreign to the Western world. What's he saying? He's saying, even in hell, God is merciful. Well, what's one of the ways God is merciful even in hell? He doesn't annihilate.
Yeah, he doesn't completely destroy people.
Okay? And if he doesn't annihilate, and people still have free will, it's a big if, then you can arrive at somebody like George MacDonald, who says, at the end of time, outside of time, at the end of our time, even Satan will finally say, my Lord and my God. He'll acknowledge, okay, I can't be you. You win. Okay? Which will come as a result of God's love. Not God's judgment, not God's punishment. Okay? And that's why people like Lewis and other, Middle Eastern writers say, what is hell? Being in the presence of God.
But not wanting to be.
And the presence of God is a consuming fire. It consumes all that which is unworthy of the presence of God. So, for those who want to be in the presence of God, it's like, if you're familiar with George MacDonald's Princess and the Crudy, I think.
Ah, yeah.
It's like when Crudy has to reach his hand into the fire, and it tingles and it burns, and yet it feels good at the same time. Okay?
I remember that part.
It's a cleanse. It's either Princess Crudy or Princess and the Goblet.
No,
It might be Princess and the Goblet.
It has to be Curdy, because
Okay.
that's the one where that's the one where he touches people's hands. And
Yeah,
gives
something
them
like that.
hugs and
So-
paws and-
It could be that, or it's like if you've ever been a fire, it burns and it hurts like hell. Literally.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's designed to do what? Don't do that. All right, we didn't get to go all the way through it, but we're going to stop.